There is a particular moment of clarity that arrives not with noise, but with stillness. It does not announce itself. It does not demand agreement. It simply settles, quietly, and rearranges your understanding of the world. It is the moment you realize that you are not being observed in the way you once believed, that your missteps are not being cataloged, that your private struggles are not the subject of sustained attention. And rather than diminishing your life, this realization refines it. At first, the thought can feel unsettling, almost austere. The notion that no one truly cares, not in the attentive, evaluative, ever watchful manner your mind once imagined. But the Stoics would have recognized this discomfort immediately. They understood that the ego resists invisibility. It prefers spectators. It prefers recognition. It prefers the illusion that one's actions are weighed and remembered. Yet this illusion is precisely what burdens the soul. Marcus Aurelius, writing not for an audience but for himself, returned repeatedly to a sober truth. Most people are absorbed entirely in their own concerns, their own anxieties, their own reputations, their own fears of insignificance. They are not tracking your choices. They are managing their own. This is not indifference in the moral sense. It is simply the structure of human attention. And once this structure is understood, something profound occurs. The performance ends. You stop narrating your life as though it were being reviewed. You stop editing your behavior for an invisible observer. You begin, perhaps for the first time, to act without anticipation of response. This is not withdrawal. It is release. Epictetus taught that disturbance arises not from events themselves, but from the judgments we attach to them. One of the most corrosive judgments is the belief that one is perpetually on display, that every action must justify itself, that every deviation requires explanation. This belief produces tension. It sharpens self-consciousness. It fractures attention. When you accept that no such audience exists, the tension loosens. Attention returns inward, not toward narcissism, toward alignment. Alignment between what you think, what you value, and how you act. This alignment is the foundation of dignity. Dignity, in the Stoic sense, has nothing to do with status. It is composure rooted in self-command. A person who no longer seeks constant recognition becomes difficult to disturb. They are not indifferent. They are grounded. Consider how much of modern unease is sustained by imagined scrutiny, the fear of being misunderstood, of appearing inadequate, of falling behind. These anxieties thrive in the presence of an audience. Remove the audience, and the drama collapses. What remains is the task itself, the work, the decision, the moment. The Stoics prized this narrowing of focus. They believed that excellence requires simplicity, not ease, but clarity. When you are no longer trying to be impressive, you are free to be precise. Precision deepens competence. Competence builds quiet confidence. Confidence that does not announce itself. Seneca warned against living as though one were perpetually being judged. He argued that such a life is not virtuous, but theatrical. Virtue to him was something practiced in private, when no reward was visible, when no praise was forthcoming, when the only witness was one's own conscience. This is a demanding standard, because it removes the comfort of external affirmation. But it also removes dependency. You stop negotiating with opinion. You stop adjusting your course to please. You become internally governed. This internal governance is the essence of Stoic freedom. Not freedom from obligation, freedom from illusion. The illusion that others are invested in your success or failure to the degree you imagine. the illusion that recognition confers worth, the illusion that being seen equates to being valued. When these illusions dissolve, effort becomes cleaner. You work because the work matters. You improve because improvement is necessary. You persist because your standards require it, not because someone is watching. This shift is subtle but transformative. It alters how you experience effort. Fatigue becomes tolerable, boredom becomes instructive, silence becomes productive, because your actions are no longer drained by the need for response. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that it is possible to live well without anyone noticing, that goodness does not require an audience, that integrity is not amplified by applause. These reminders were not expressions of modesty. They were acts of psychological defense against vanity, against distraction, against the endless hunger for approval. To accept that no one cares is to lay down a heavy burden, the burden of constant self-evaluation, the burden of comparison, the burden of explaining oneself. In its absence, something steadier takes its place: self-respect. Self-respect does not fluctuate with opinion. It is cultivated through consistency, through doing what one believes to be right, regardless of reaction. This consistency stabilizes the mind. It reduces inner conflict, because one is no longer torn between authenticity and acceptance. Acceptance is relinquished. Authenticity remains. This is not a rejection of society. It is a reorientation within it. You continue to engage, to contribute, to participate, but without the expectation that your efforts will be noticed or rewarded. And paradoxically, this often makes them more effective because they are no longer distorted by need. The Stoics understood that desire for recognition subtly corrupts action. It introduces impatience. It invites compromise. It weakens resolve. Action taken without expectation is purer, more deliberate, more resilient. Failure, too, changes character when no audience is imagined. It loses its theatrical sting. It becomes informational. A lesson, not a verdict. When no one is watching, there is no humiliation. Only feedback. Only adjustment. Only continuation. This reframing restores courage. You attempt what matters. You risk improvement. You tolerate imperfection, because imperfection is no longer public currency. It is simply part of growth. Growth, in Stoic thought, is internal, invisible, measured not by acclaim, but by mastery of self. This mastery begins with acceptance. Acceptance that you are largely unseen, unjudged, unremarked upon, and therefore free. In the next part, we will examine how this acceptance reshapes ambition, discipline, and the pursuit of excellence, and why working without witnesses produces a depth of character that public success rarely achieves. When the illusion of constant observation dissolves, ambition undergoes a quiet but decisive transformation. It does not disappear. It refines itself. For many, ambition is inseparable from comparison. It is shaped by rank, by visibility, by how one appears in relation to others. This form of ambition is restless. It is never satisfied because its reference point is unstable. Someone will always seem ahead, someone else more admired, more recognized. The Stoics regarded this as a fragile orientation, not because ambition is ignoble, but because ambition that depends on spectators lacks independence. Seneca observed that those who measure their progress by applause are forever vulnerable to silence. Their motivation weakens when attention fades. Their discipline fractures when praise is absent. Such effort is conditional. The Stoic seeks unconditional effort, effort that persists whether it is noticed or not. Acceptance that no one is watching as closely as imagined removes a subtle crutch. There is no audience to impress, no reassurance to expect. What remains is the work itself, and one's relationship to it. This confrontation is demanding, because self-deception becomes more difficult. One cannot claim commitment without evidence. One cannot borrow the appearance of diligence. There is only consistency, or its absence. This is where true discipline begins, not as intensity, but as regularity. The Stoics understood discipline as a form of self-respect, a way of honoring one's rational nature. To act well consistently, even in private, was for them a moral act. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that it is possible to live honorably in obscurity, that greatness of character does not require public confirmation. This idea stands in quiet opposition to modern notions of success, which often equate value with exposure. But exposure does not deepen skill. It often dilutes it. The need to be seen introduces haste. Haste erodes precision. When no one is watching, haste loses its urgency. You are no longer racing perception. You are refining capability. This refinement is slow, deliberate, at times monotonous, but it is durable. The Stoics believed that excellence is cumulative, built through repeated attention to small matters, details, habits, judgment. These rarely attract attention, and that is precisely their advantage. Acceptance also alters one's relationship with status. Status exerts pressure only when it is believed to confer identity. When one's sense of worth is tethered to position, title, or recognition, anxiety becomes constant. Because status is inherently unstable. It fluctuates with circumstance, with opinion, with fortune. The Stoics classified status among the preferred indifference, not to be rejected, but never to be mistaken for essence. When you accept that people are not constantly assessing your position, status loses its power to disturb. You no longer overinterpret its presence or absence. You can hold it lightly. Use it without being shaped by it. This lightness produces clarity. Decisions become less performative. You stop choosing what looks impressive. You begin choosing what is effective, what is sustainable, what aligns with your values. This shift also affects how you approach success. Success, when imagined as public validation, becomes addictive. One achievement merely sets the stage for the next. There is no arrival, only escalation. The Stoics warned against this endless ascent, not because progress is undesirable, but because insatiability erodes contentment. Acceptance interrupts this cycle. It allows you to define success internally, by effort rather than outcome, by integrity rather than recognition, by mastery rather than applause. This internal standard is demanding, more demanding than external metrics, because it cannot be negotiated. You cannot excuse yourself by pointing to praise. You cannot dismiss shortcomings because others approve. Your only measure is whether you have acted in accordance with reason. This standard sharpens focus. Work becomes quieter, more concentrated, less scattered by distraction. You stop announcing intentions. You begin executing them, silently, relentlessly. The Stoics valued this silence. They believed that premature disclosure weakens resolve, that speaking too early dissipates energy. When no one is watching, silence becomes natural. There is no need to justify preparation, no need to signal progress. You work because the work demands it. This also reshapes one's relationship with money. Money, like status, often functions as a signal, a way of communicating success, taste, belonging. The Stoics approached money pragmatically, as a tool, neither virtuous nor corrupting in itself, but dangerous when mistaken for worth. Acceptance reduces the impulse to signal. You spend less to be seen. You allocate more to be secure. You prioritize resilience over display. This does not lead to austerity, it leads to intentionality. Comfort is enjoyed without dependency, pleasure without excess, security without obsession. The Stoics believed that the person who needs little is difficult to enslave. Acceptance cultivates this minimal dependence. You stop chasing upgrades for their symbolic value. You invest in what strengthens autonomy, health, skill, time, attention. Time, in particular, changes character. When you stop performing for an audience, urgency softens. You realize how many deadlines were imaginary, how many milestones were inherited. This does not slow ambition, it steadies it. Progress becomes less erratic, less reactive, more deliberate. You are no longer compelled to move simply to be seen moving. You can pause, reflect, adjust. This patience is strategic. It allows depth to form. The Stoics understood that depth outlasts speed, that what is built slowly often endures. Acceptance makes room for this depth. It removes the pressure to constantly demonstrate momentum. You are free to mature. In the next part, we will explore how this acceptance reshapes relationships, dissolves people-pleasing, and establishes boundaries grounded not in defiance, but in self-command. When one fully accepts the absence of an attentive audience, relationships undergo a quiet recalibration. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but decisively. Much of what strains human connection is not conflict itself, but expectation. Expectation that effort will be noticed, that sacrifice will be remembered, that restraint will be rewarded. The Stoics recognized this pattern with remarkable clarity. They understood that unspoken expectations transform generosity into leverage. And leverage, once introduced, corrodes sincerity. Seneca warned that kindness loses its virtue the moment it seeks acknowledgement, not because gratitude is wrong, but because dependency is. When one gives in order to be seen, the act is no longer free. It becomes conditional. Acceptance dissolves this condition. You no longer assume that your patience is being recorded, that your restraint is being tallied, that your loyalty is being evaluated. And in that absence, resentment evaporates, because resentment thrives only where expectation lives. This does not make one indifferent to others. It makes one precise. People-pleasing, so often mistaken for kindness, is revealed for what it is. Anxiety translated into behavior. A fear of disapproval expressed as accommodation. The Stoics regarded this fear as a threat to judgment, for when approval governs conduct, truth is compromised. One begins to speak cautiously rather than honestly, to comply rather than to choose. Acceptance removes the imagined observer that sustains this fear. Without that observer, behavior stabilizes. You say less, but what you say carries weight. You agree less readily, but when you do, it is sincere. You no longer overextend because there is no unseen tribunal to appease. Boundaries cease to feel defensive. They become natural expressions of self-command. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that one may be both benevolent and firm, that generosity does not require self-erasure. This balance is central to Stoic ethics, to care without capitulation, to engage without entanglement. Acceptance restores this balance. You stop anticipating disappointment, stop bracing for judgment, stop interpreting silence as rejection. Most human behavior, once stripped of narrative, is neutral. Inattention is not hostility. Distance is not disdain. Disagreement is not betrayal. The Stoics insisted upon this realism. They urged their students to describe events plainly, without embellishment, to call things what they are. This practice reduces unnecessary suffering. When one ceases to assume personal significance in every interaction, social anxiety weakens. You are no longer performing. You are present. Presence is quietly compelling, not because it demands attention, but because it does not seek it. Others sense this absence of need, and in that absence, respect forms. Not admiration, respect. Respect arises when one is not attempting to extract validation. It is a response to composure, to consistency, to emotional economy. Acceptance also alters one's experience of solitude. Solitude is often feared because it exposes dependency. The expectation that others should supply meaning, affirm worth, fill silence. When one accepts that no one is tasked with completing one's inner life, solitude transforms. It becomes restorative, a space for reflection rather than deficiency. Epictetus taught that the person who depends upon others for emotional stability is perpetually vulnerable. Acceptance withdraws this dependency. You become companionable with yourself, not isolated, self-sufficient. This self-sufficiency is not arrogance. It is equilibrium. It allows you to choose relationships rather than cling to them, to participate without fear of loss, to disengage without bitterness. Loss, when it occurs, is felt, but it does not dismantle identity, because identity is no longer anchored to external attachment. The Stoics believed that grief should be honored, but not indulged, that sorrow is human, but despair is optional. Acceptance prepares the mind for this distinction. You feel deeply, but you do not collapse inward. You mourn, but you do not dissolve. This resilience is quiet, uncelebrated, but unmistakable. In conversation, acceptance produces restraint. You no longer rush to correct, to defend, to persuade, not because you lack conviction, but because you no longer require agreement to feel intact. Silence becomes a choice rather than avoidance. Speech becomes deliberate. This selectivity alters social dynamics. Others slow down. Conflicts de-escalate. Tension loses momentum because it requires participation to survive. The Stoics understood that provocation is powerless without consent. Acceptance withholds that consent, not in defiance, in composure. You are not unmoved, you are ungoverned. This distinction matters. Unmoved suggests numbness. Ungoverned suggests sovereignty. Sovereignty over one's reactions, over one's words, over one's presence. This sovereignty is the foundation of inner nobility. Nobility not of birth, but of character. A person governed from within does not need to dominate externally. Their steadiness suffices. In the final part, we will bring this philosophy to its completion. How acceptance reshapes freedom, meaning, and the structure of a well-lived life. Why recognizing that no one is watching is not a retreat from significance, but an entry into it. And how to live with quiet authority, in a world addicted to noise. At a certain point, acceptance ceases to feel like an insight and becomes a position from which life is no longer endured, but inhabited. The understanding that no one is watching, no one is keeping score, no one is quietly assessing your worth. This does not empty existence of meaning. It restores it. The Stoics never sought consolation. They sought clarity. Clarity is often mistaken for severity because it removes comforting illusions. Yet it is precisely these illusions that exhaust the mind. The illusion of constant evaluation, the illusion of necessary approval, the illusion that significance must be externally confirmed. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to a simple truth. Life unfolds whether or not it is observed. Virtue remains virtue in obscurity. Integrity does not require witnesses. When one accepts this fully, attention returns to its rightful place, to the present moment, to the action at hand, to what is within one's power. The mind grows quieter, not because thought diminishes, but because unnecessary commentary dissolves. The internal narration, the endless speculation about how one appears, how one is perceived, how one is judged, recedes. What remains is judgment itself, clear, unencumbered, free. This freedom is not indulgence, it is discipline. For when no one is watching, there is no one to blame, no one to impress, no one to appease. Only one's own standards remain. This is a formidable position because it admits no evasion. But it is also stabilizing because it aligns effort with meaning. Meaning in Stoic thought is not discovered, it is enacted through consistency, through restraint, through reasoned choice. Acceptance allows this enactment to occur without distortion. You are no longer negotiating with opinion. You are acting in accordance with understanding. This coherence is the quiet reward of Stoic practice, a sense that one's inner life and outer conduct are no longer in conflict, that one is not divided. Division produces anxiety. Unity produces calm. Calm, however, should not be mistaken for passivity. The Stoic calm is alert, engaged, deliberate. It is the calm of one who knows what matters, and, equally, what does not. Epictetus taught that freedom is the ability to desire only what depends upon oneself. Acceptance makes this possible. Without acceptance, this principle remains theoretical. With acceptance, it becomes lived experience. You stop demanding that the world conform to your preferences. You adapt your preferences to reality. This is not surrender. It is intelligence, the intelligent response to the nature of things. Life does not guarantee fairness, recognition, understanding. It offers only moments in which one may choose how to respond. To choose well, repeatedly, is the essence of character. The Stoics believed that character is destiny, not in the sense of fate, but in the sense that the quality of one's responses determines the quality of one's life. When no audience is imagined, responses become more honest, less dramatic, more proportionate. You cease to inflate minor setbacks into personal affronts. You cease to magnify small victories into proof of worth. Everything assumes its proper scale. This proportionality is wisdom. It allows one to engage fully without being consumed, to care without clinging, to strive without anxiety, to endure without bitterness. Acceptance also reframes ambition, not as conquest, but as cultivation. The cultivation of judgment, of restraint, of attention. The Stoics did not aspire to be admired. They aspired to be unshaken by praise, unshaken by blame, unshaken by fortune. This steadiness is not dramatic. It does not announce itself, but it is unmistakable. Others feel it. They may not name it, but they recognize it, because it is rare. In a world of performance, authenticity stands out. In a culture of noise, restraint commands respect. This respect is not sought. It is the natural response to self-command, to inner authority. Authority that does not insist, that does not persuade, that simply remains intact. Acceptance also prepares one for the final realities of life: change, loss, mortality. The Stoics did not avert their gaze from these truths. They considered them essential to living well. To remember that life is finite is not morbid, it is clarifying. Why perform endlessly for an audience that will soon disperse? Why exhaust oneself seeking recognition that fades? Acceptance aligns one with transience, and in doing so, deepens appreciation. Moments become less hurried, time less squandered, attention more carefully placed. You begin to live deliberately, not loudly, deliberately. This deliberateness is the mark of a life governed from within, a life not dictated by impulse, not buffeted by opinion, not fractured by expectation, but ordered, measured, quietly resolute. If these reflections have resonated, it suggests an inclination toward depth rather than display, toward clarity rather than comfort. Remaining connected supports the continuation of work that favors discipline, reason, and inner freedom. If there is someone whose mind would meet these ideas with equal seriousness, sharing them may invite a conversation of value. And should you choose to leave a comment, let it be considered. Not a reaction, a response. For that distinction lies at the heart of this philosophy. The Stoics did not promise happiness, they offered liberation. Not from difficulty, but from illusion. And when one finally accepts that no one is watching, one is no longer diminished. One is free to live with intention, with composure, and with a dignity that requires no audience at all.